What a good story this is. Childhood sweethearts who reconnect 20 years later only to realize they were meant for each other. In the story, I would be the evil white American husband standing in the way of destiny.
Shut up.
Past Lives is a love story that spans over 20 years in 2 different continents across sort of Pacific Ocean. It's quite autobiographical in some ways. It is very much an adaptation of my life into a love story.
He was just this kid in my head for such a long time. And I think I just missed him.
Did he miss you?
It's asking questions about what's possible in one lifetime.
너는 정말 기억 그대로야.
You get to see a progression of a human's life. So it's expansive, but it also has tremendous heart and focus to it.
Just as I am a product of both Eastern and Western way of thinking, I wanted Past Lives to have a relationship to both worlds.
Celine had such a singular vision for this story. It just seemed very obvious there was a potential to make something that felt true to her life experience. We're exploring this idea of childhood love. How does that play out? What parts of that can still exist and can remain true into adulthood?
I think we do get a feeling of a long-lasting, almost soulmate-like kind of connection. It's really hard to describe in words because you just feel it when you're with somebody.
That moment when we turn and we see each other for the first time in so many years, we wanted to capture what that could really feel like.
Hae Sung!
That moment before we meet at the pond, we are vulnerable together, but don't have any dialogue. So it's like, how deep can I go showing that inner life only through the eyes, which are the only parts of the nervous system that are openly exposed to the real world and thereby have a window to your heart and your emotion.
와, 너다.
Celine, she asked that we not make physical contact.
And having not have that until that moment that the audience is experiencing that with us together, those kind of reactions, I felt like were really visceral.
That moment became pressurized because of that. This wordless exchange that is full body and painful and miserable and also electric and dynamic. The act of falling in love, it was a surprise. It was a surprise to me.
I needed an actress who understood the very complicated thing of speaking in very different languages and being able to be loved in different cultures. And Greta Lee has been everything that I could have possibly imagined for a partner for this journey, partly because she also exists in these liminalities.
It's just that you make my life so much bigger. And I'm wondering if I do the same thing for you.
The language component of this film was a really big deal for me. It forced me to be vulnerable in a way that I was deeply uncomfortable with.
I'm just a girl from Korea, you know.
There's something about being bilingual. It is so exposing. That feeling of having one foot in 2 different worlds is something that is so complicated and wonderful and also painful sometimes, like how to reconcile 2 totally separate identities. And this film was requiring me to jump into it fully.
와,
진짜 와닿아.
와.
And let's roll sound, please. Rolling.
나 가는 거 알아?
그럼.
Early in conversations with Celine, we sort of tossed around this idea of Teo and I not being able to meet until we absolutely had to. And luckily we had a crew and a team that helped facilitate that. I And that's us meeting for the first time on film. I think it works, and also it's just fun to be able to do these little experiments as actors.
The first time that the actors who played those two characters met each other was my favorite time.
안녕하세요. 만나서 반가워요.
Hi, nice to meet you, Asa.
Through who Nora is, we're seeing two worlds and two universes collapse upon each other.
Here we go, and let me go.
너를 진짜 사랑하는 것 같아.
The bar scene was crucial. We took 2 days to shoot one scene, and arguably the movie lives and dies on the success of the bar scene, and that was made explicitly clear to us in the shooting of it. The genesis of that scene was a real-life experience where Celine found herself flanked by two men, one her husband, and the other her childhood sweetheart. The profound experience of sitting in the threshold between two men who could know her so completely but in two totally different ways. So we really took our time in terms of making sure we could honor what that experience is like.
네 남편이 좋은 게 이렇게 아플지 몰랐어.
I remember for me wanting these escape routes. I kept suggesting maybe I go get a drink. Maybe I excuse myself to go to the restroom. Maybe there's
You
this.
kept trying to leave.
I kept trying to leave because it was so awkward. You know, trying to be honest and natural, you keep wanting to get out. But Celine insisted I stay there in the uncomfortable awkwardness of the scene.
왠지 널 보고 여기도 오고 그러니까 좀 이상한 생각이 많아지네.
무슨 생각?
만약에 네가 한국을 떠나지 않았다면 내가 널 찾았을까? 우리가 사귀었을까? 헤어졌을까? 부부가 됐을까? 우리는 아이들을 가졌을까? 그런 생각들.
The way that I had to be as Nora with Arthur as opposed to Hae Sung is entirely different. And the physicality of that is really specific. That's one of the essential ideas of this movie based on Celine's actual experience, that she could feel like a completely different woman in the presence of each of these men who know and love her so differently and fully and completely.
Just talking about you.
After 2 days of filming, finally we get to a point where Hae Sung and Arthur are sat alone and kind of have their man-to-man talk, if you will. And I think that build-up led for tremendous energy and a very dynamic scene.
To be loved without being needed, which I think is very much an important part of this film, Hae Sung is able to love Nora without needing her. That's sort of how I feel about shooting in New York too. It's impossible, but you somehow do it, and it's always worth it.
To have the chance to shoot the authentic New York, especially this present New York, was really exciting. I know the crew and everyone here who is from New York was really excited to be shooting on the streets, feel that energy of New York. There's nothing like it.
Especially when you're working on 35mm film, where you know you have only like a limited amount of takes. So it kind of heightens the stakes. Everyone was so concentrated and focused.
The way in which Arthur is there for Nora, it requires the kind of commitment that Hae Sung is not being asked to give. Hae Sung throughout the film calls her Nayoung, and Arthur throughout his existence in the film calls her Nora. In the middle of that, Nora is making a decision to be Nora.
It's so much more than a love story. It's a story about cultural identity. It's a story about change. It's a story about connections and loss of connections.
I was expecting it to have the elements of being a romantic drama, but I can't believe how much this movie has just become so much bigger than that. It's so much more expansive, and it's about our human capacity for love. Maybe that capacity is much more boundless than we ever knew. They're big ideas. I hope people can like feel that in the way that we have felt it in the making of this.